So what if you could figure out your life's purpose, not through some bolt of lightning from the sky, but through a really disciplined, structured investigation? I know, that might sound a little out there. But today, we're going to dive into the true story of a super logical, practical builder who did exactly that. He used an almost scientific process to trace this single unbroken thread through his life, and honestly, the method he used is something any of us can learn from.
So let's meet the guy at the center of this, Chuck McMurray. He's a troubleshooter. When things get chaotic, he's the one looking for the mechanics behind it all. You know, the structure. He's not looking for a spiritual meaning, he's looking for the control panel. He is pretty much the last person you would ever expect to go on a journey into past lives.
And that's the big puzzle here, right? For his entire life, this super practical guy has been fascinated by clocks, calendars, engines, you name it. Anything about schedules and timing. It was this constant pull towards coordination and alignment that, his own logic just couldn't really explain. So this practical man needed a practical answer. Where did he go?
Okay, let's really get into this. To get what Chuck was going through, you first have to understand the one problem he's been trying to solve his whole life. It didn't matter if he was working on car engines or these super complex AI systems, it always came back to one core idea. And that idea is drift. How do you reduce it? Think about it, a clock slowly losing time, a company losing sight of its mission, or even a person kind of losing touch with what really matters to them. Chuck's whole life has been about building systems that fight against that drift and hold a steady course. And this is where the spiritual, intuitive Kevin Ryerson comes into the picture. But, and this is key, he didn't just show up with a bunch of grand announcements. Nope, instead, he worked with Chuck. He brought this unique methodology to the table, and they treated the whole thing less like a mystical reading and more like a forensic investigation.
And you can see right here just how different their approach was. A typical reading gives you pronouncements, right? Claims. But their method was all about questions and finding patterns. They weren't looking for famous names or big identities. They were hunting for a repeating job function. Every single impression wasn't taken as proof. It was treated like an investigative lead. It was just a clue to start digging deeper.
So as they started using this really disciplined process, something amazing began to happen. A stunningly consistent pattern started to show up. This wasn't just a random collection of cool past lives. It was one single coherent thread that was woven through all these different times in history, all centered on one specific job. Let's just follow this thread for a second. It seems to start with a calendar maker back in ancient Egypt, someone whose job was to give structure to the entire community using time. Then it moves to a philosophical engineer in Greece, making those cosmic ideas mechanical. It pops up again with John Harrison, the guy who built chronometers and literally waged a war on drift for clocks on ships. Then there's Nicholas Otto, who took the violent power of an engine and disciplined it. See the pattern? The point was never to say, hey, I was this famous person. No way. It was to see the unbelievable consistency in the job description over centuries. It was always the same mission: create order and reduce drift.
So what stops this from just being a cool story? Well, for a builder like Chuck, it all came down to the process. It had to be formal, transparent, and something you could actually replicate. So let's look at the actual workflow they put together.
This 6-step workflow was basically their operating system. They'd capture all the raw data, dreams, feelings, images, then pull out key anchors like names and places and map all the connections. But the absolute key, especially for a skeptical mind like Chuck's, was step 6, the audit. They actively tried to prove themselves wrong. They deliberately avoided the trap of fame chasing, and that one critical step is what kept the whole thing grounded and made the results actually useful.
And, the result of this whole investigation wasn't to have a collection of cool historical stories to tell at parties. It was something way more practical. It was a complete shift in how Chuck understood his own life, his talents, and his responsibilities. Right here, right now.
And this is really where it all just clicks into place. The whole point was never to figure out who he was. It was all about getting clarity on what he is here to do now. The process took what felt like just a bunch of random personal interests and focused them into a clear set of tools, all pointing toward one specific mission. In the end, that entire long investigation, from ancient calendars all the way to modern AI, could be boiled down to this one powerful mission statement. It gave him a strategic North Star. It turned a life of what seemed like disconnected projects into one single coherent roadmap.
So look, this whole story isn't really just about Chuck McMurray. It's a model. It's a structured way to look at the patterns in your own life. And for anyone out there who's interested in maybe trying this kind of investigative process for themselves, here's how you can learn a little bit more.
A great place to start is reincarnation.info. It's a research site, and from there you can navigate over to Kevin Ryerson's page and just explore more about this type of work and the methodical process they use.
And if you want to connect more directly, you can also just go straight to Kevin Ryerson's personal website. That's kevinryerson.com.
All of which kind of leaves us with one final question to think about. If you look at your own passions, your own skills, and the weird little obsessions that have pulled you forward your entire life, what do you think the unbroken thread in your story might be?